Well, this is JC back again with chapter 32 of my book entitled Todd. I'll begin now. Chapter 32 Todd. Todd, Betsy, and Aunt Lola busied themselves stocking their new products, mostly in the stockroom for tonight. They did put a few things in the store, things that had a big turnover. After a while, they closed the store and Aunt Lola went home, as did Todd and Betsy. They didn't make coffee this night, just talked about Chuck and the job he did. Betsy commented Chuck had done a good job with his pickups and deliveries. Todd said he was quite impressed with Chuck's work, impressed with the way Chuck had handled things at the warehouse, informing him about the extra space and mentioning it could be used for Junior and Jim's benefit to deliver their goods. Now he needed to determine how to pay Chuck. Uh, Maybe for deliveries with mileage plus loading and unloading time, a straight hourly rate, or with a fixed salary. He would see Chuck tomorrow and they could discuss it in detail and come to some sort of conclusion. Todd had to consider his finances at hand and the cost of fuel for the pickup and the time involved by Chuck in it all. He also could see where in the future Dana might want to become a part of all this too. Todd and his mother discussed much of this for a while. Then, having had a long day, they retired, each to her and his own reverie. It had been a long day, but for Todd, it would be a short night. Todd was awakened to the sound of the telephone ringing. He glanced at the clock radio at his bedside. It was 3:23 a.m. A strange, eerie feeling came over him, and a thought flashed through his mind to not answer it, just let it ring. But he picked up the receiver on the third ring. "Hello," he said, now wide awake. "This is Todd Daniels. May I help you?" He heard a small, strange noise on the line and started to repeat his greeting, but stayed quiet instead and just waited. In a long moment, a few seconds, a voice choked with emotion said, "This is Jake Carlton. Todd, Grandpa died. He called me this morning about an hour ago and said, 'Jakey boy, I don't feel too good. Can you come over for a while?' Todd, I went right over, and when I got there, he was already gone. Todd, he left a little handwritten note. It said, 'Sorry, Sonny. I couldn't wait.' Todd, I don't know what to do." Todd said, "Jake, you call the police and report it. Does anyone else, the family members, know yet?" "No, I didn't know what to do," Jake said. "I didn't know what I'd tell them, so I just called you is all." "Okay," said Todd. "Call one member of your family, the one you think is sort of in charge of things, and tell him or her what happened and to come over there. Make sure your grandpa's presentable, not uncovered or anything. I'm sure he isn't. I'll leave now and be there as soon as I can." Jake said okay, and they hung up the phones. Todd got dressed and woke his mother. She came right awake, and he quickly explained what had happened and that he'd be back later in the day. She agreed, and Todd left, and Betsy went to the kitchen, wondering if she should go back to bed for a couple more hours or just stay up. She decided to stay up, so she put on a pot of Folgers. Betsy sat at the kitchen table, wondering about things, thinking of this last year and wondering why, if indeed there was a reason, that things had happened the way they did. Bobby gone, and Todd having to more or less take over the business, and Todd meeting Leslie and becoming so close to her. But the biggest mystery was what had happened tonight. Some grown man in another town, whom they had only just met, had some kind of trouble happen to him, and instead of calling his family or the police, he called Todd, her 12 and 3/4-year-old son. What did God have on his mind, she mused, thinking of her son. There must be more of a reason for Todd than I can understand, she thought. Todd drove carefully going to Mercer. Not having a driving license worried him somewhat, and so he was extra careful when driving. A few miles out of town, he rounded a long curve and saw flashing lights ahead. Maybe a wrecker or road work. No, there's a red light, so that meant police or state patrol. Todd released the accelerator and the car began to slow. He turned his four-way flashers on to show he saw what was happening. When he got within 100 yards of the patrol car, a state trooper waved him to the side and motioned him to stop. Todd opened the door and stood facing the trooper, waiting for him to approach. "What's the trouble, officer?" he said. The trooper came close to him and said, "A car ran off the road then back on. He's got it blocked. I think he had one too many." "I hope no one's hurt," said Todd. Trooper laughed and said, "No, God protects idiots and drunks. Looks like this guy may be both. I know he was lucky. The car's a mess, but he doesn't even appear to have a scratch on him anywhere. When the tow truck finishes hooking up, we'll give this gentleman a free ride to town." He added, "We'll have this cleared up in a few minutes." "Okay, thanks," said Todd as the trooper walked back toward the flashing lights. The tow truck finished loading the wrecked car up on the truck bed, and the driver picked up his markers and started toward Belton. Todd looked at the car as it passed, but didn't recognize it. The trooper stepped out into the road and waved Todd on. Todd started up slowly and waved at the trooper as he passed. The trooper smiled and waved back. The rest of the trip was uneventful, and Todd hoped his being late wouldn't make Jake too anxious. He pulled up in front of the Carlton house and stopped at the curb. This was strange. There were no other cars there, not police cars or any other. Todd sensed something was wrong. He knocked on the door. There was no answer. So he knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. Todd tried the doorknob and the door opened. It was dark in the room, but he saw a small light toward the back, down a hallway. Todd called out, "Jake, are you here? It's Todd." There was no answer, so Jake turned on the light and walked down the hall to what appeared to be a bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and Todd pushed it on open. The small clock radio light was barely illuminating the edge of the bed. Todd saw a hunched-over body at the edge of the bed and said, "Jake, are you all right?" There was no answer, so Todd found the light switch near the door and turned on the overhead light. Now he could see Jake sitting in an armchair, facing along the bed toward the foot, leaning forward and to his right, partly resting on the edge of the bed. His head was down, but Todd could see Jake's eyes were open. He walked to him and touched his cheek. Jake didn't move. Todd gently shook Jake's shoulder and said, "Jake, are you okay?" Jake mumbled, "I found him like this." Todd considered Jake was in some sort of shock, not really aware of what was happening here. He took Jake's arm, gently but firmly pulling on it, said, "Jake, stand up. We need to go into the living room. You can lie down there on the sofa." Jake slowly stood and allowed Todd to lead him into the living room. He sat on the sofa and leaned back, his eyes closed. Todd knew he needed to do something to bring Jake out of this. He sat down by Jake and said, "Jake, you need to call the police now and call your mother and let her know what happened." Jake didn't move, didn't even look up. Todd reached down and grabbed Jake's arm and yanked him up. "You're a man, so act like one. This is your problem, no one else's. Now do what you have to do." Jake looked at this man who was yanking on him. Todd wondered for a moment what would happen next, and he was ready. Suddenly Jake's body stiffened, and he said, "You're right, it's me now, not Grandpa, just me." And he picked up the telephone receiver and dialed 911. Jake said into the phone, "This is Jake Carlton. I'm at my grandpa's house, and my grandpa has died. I don't know for sure what happened, but I need someone here right away." Todd listened as the 911 operator spoke. Jake gave the address and said he'd be here, and he hung up. Then he dialed another number. "Mom," he said, "you need to come to Grandpa's house. He has died." There was silence while Jake listened to his mother. Then he said, "No, nothing happened. He just died. Do you need me to come after you?" He listened then and said, "Okay, I'll see you in a while." Jake looked at Todd then and reached his hand out. As he shook Todd's hand, he said, "Thanks, kid. I think you just helped me grow up. I'm fine now, and we can get on with things." Now, this is the end of chapter 32 of my book entitled Todd. I certainly hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and tune in on chapter 33 whenever I get it written. Thanks so much. This is JC saying I'll see you down the road. if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise.